Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's fireside chat on waste reduction, especially plastic waste. I am Ashu Gupta, Director for Manufacturing Operations in Juniper, and today I have the distinct pleasure of inviting our guest, Ben Fitzgerald, who is the Director of Operations for Aston Martin Aramco Formula One team. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you. Thank you to everybody for inviting me.
So before we get started, Ben, can I just ask you to maybe give me a little bit of an introduction of what you do in AMF1?
Yeah, absolutely. We've just heard from Claire, our Chief Information Officer, and Eric, our Deputy Technical Director. Both of those people obviously work within the team here at Silverstone to continue to develop race after race, year after year, our Formula One car. And fundamentally, my responsibility at the simplest level is to make sure that the parts and the product that is required to race are available trackside. And just for everybody's benefit, I explained to Ashu earlier today that to get us to where we are at this point in the season, we've made nearly 10,000 parts per race. So what appears to be a very glamorous race spectacle that we see on the television, which absolutely is as a sport, back at the factory, there's a huge effort. All 850 staff that we have here in Silverstone, we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to be able to get through the development of the car, race after race, week after week. And in effect, we get to a point where we have to do this in a sustainable, very financially sound way, and that drives our approach and innovation on both waste, sustainability, and value for money.
Oh, wonderful. So Ben, before we get started, I thought, I was reading about the topic itself, and there were some amazing facts that I found related to plastic pollution. So I want to talk to you about those before we get into the actual discussion. So annually, we generate about 400 million tons of plastic waste as species. That's, I couldn't get my head around it. So if I think about the total weight of humans on this earth, we generate the equivalent of that in annual plastic waste every year. And only about 9%, less than 10% of that gets recycled. So if you think about that, we are releasing into the environment almost the same weight of all humans on Earth every year. And a lot of that goes into our water streams, so it comes kind of back to us. All of the plastic, almost all of the plastic is generated by fossil fuels. So there are emissions implications to that. There is a saying, all waste is bad. In an efficient organization, we don't want waste. Plastic waste is especially bad because it just remains there. You cannot get rid of it. So it is imperative for all of us to be able to drive as much of possible the reduction in plastic use. And that's what we are going to talk about today. Any thoughts on the facts that I just mentioned?
It's incredible, Ashu. I guess the scale of the business is huge, from Juniper's side. From the AMF1 side, equally, we are producing a lot of product relative to the, to our end goal, which is to win a race and subsequently to win a world championship within Formula One. I think from my perspective, although we have very different scales of challenge, the fundamental core principle of what we're trying to do is the same. We are trying to reduce plastic waste. We're trying to become more sustainable businesses. And that, for me, I think is what we'll explore shortly.
And how much plastic waste approximately AMF1 is producing every year, that if you have that information?
So, I have a slightly different answer, I guess, Ashley, because from our perspective, we have so much varied waste, whether it's composite waste, resin waste, metallic waste and plastic waste. So totally, we produce about 361 tons of waste in 2023. This year, we're on target to reduce that, which is great news. Of the 361 tons that we've produced, 60% of it in the last 12 months was recycled, and 36% of it was recovered. So we are actively trying to improve our sustainability in this regard, or our waste management. And fundamentally, that comes back to some of the benefits that we see both as a society within AMF1 and in the immediate surrounding areas within the UK.
Oh, that's very interesting. I mean, I would give you an equivalent number from Juniper side. So we used 2022, which is our baseline year. We use more than 1 million pounds of plastic in our packaging alone. So I'm discounting everything that we use in our operations or in the products. Just in packaging, we used more than 1 million pounds of plastic. We were able to reduce significant amount of it, about 12% from 2022 to 2023, about 130,000 pounds. Probably would be about maybe 70,000 kilograms, I would say, or maybe 60,000 kilograms. But all of these numbers, don't mean much unless I'm able to visualize it, right? So we visualized it. What is it in terms of, number of plastic bottles, for example? So 130,000 pounds is equivalent to a football stadium filled with plastic bottles instead of people. So that's the kind of the scale of plastic reduction and plastic use that we're talking about within just our packaging. And Juniper is not a huge company. There are companies that are much bigger than us. So I want to emphasize to the audience kind of the scale of the issue that we are talking about at hand. Now, let's maybe talk about some of the drivers. Can you speak to what is driving Aston Martin Formula One team to focus on waste, especially plastic waste, and how you reduce it in your day-to-day operations?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, for the audience, as a business within the UK, we recognise and are working towards the UK Plastic Pact's targets. So that's our requirement driven by the UK Plastic Pact. There are mainly 4 targets. So we target 1 is to eliminate problematic or unnecessary single-use plastic packaging. And that's really how do we adjust how we operate, design and manufacture components to remove that waste. The second target then for us as part of the UK Plastic Pact is that the 100% of our packaging that we use needs to be reusable, recyclable or compostable. Yeah. Now, there are some simple things in that regard where even in the factory itself with the 850 people I talked about earlier on, at the moment, we are using compostable cups, for example, as part of coffee. And when in Formula One producing, such significant amounts of parts per person, coffee is a very important product to the efficiency of the organisation. So we are using a lot of those cups at this moment in time. What we are about to do is to issue a metallic cup, it'll probably be an aluminium cup, reusable cup, and then remove that waste within our organisation. When we get to target 3, we're then into 70% of plastic packaging effectively recyclable or composted. So in effect, this is a slightly reduced target. I think we should actually aim for target 2. And then target 4 is 30% of average recycled content across all plastic packaging. So they're the staged elements of the UK Plastic Pact. That's our key driver, external influence from outside of the business. I also mentioned earlier on about internally, we have our regulations that basically create the way that we operate as a Formula One team. So whether it's a technical regulation, a sporting regulation, financial regulation, or a sustainability or an environmental regulation. From that perspective, financially, we are driven to continue to take waste from our system, plastic or anything else really, which is a great way that the FIA and the organisations as the teams are now coming together to work and understand how we can best utilize our common understanding, common practices. So they're the two, perhaps one external factor and one internal factor that's driving our work in this area.
That's really interesting, because I think for us as well, the activity really started with the EU regulations around tax on single-use plastic. We ship a lot of our product to EU, and we do use a significant amount of plastic in our packaging. So it would have, resulted in increased cost for us to be able to ship that amount of plastic into EU. For the benefit of the audience, I think we are going to be using 3 different types of plastics in the discussion. So I want to clarify that for everyone. Single-use plastic is something that cannot be recycled. So you use it and it goes into a landfill. Basically, there is really nothing you can do about it. Then you have what I call virgin plastic. That could be a single-use plastic, or it could be plastic that can be recycled. But virgin plastic means new plastic being created from fossil fuel. And then we have something called recycled plastic, which, as the term implies, you are recycling the older plastic to create new plastic. And it's in terms of what is the worst, single-use plastic is the worst, virgin plastic is the next, and recycled plastic is the best. If you have to use plastic, you would like to use as much of the recycled plastic as possible. So I was coming back to the regulations part. This is how we started on our journey when we looked at the upcoming regulations in EU, especially in Spain, UK, Italy. We realized that it's going to cost us a lot if we don't, change what we do. And then at some level, I feel like everybody is an environmental steward, right? And, all the employees, our customers, our stakeholders, they would all like to do the right thing. So once the regulations move us in a certain direction, it picks up momentum, and then you work on it, and you reduce the amount of plastic that you're using in whichever operations or your product we are talking about. And it's interesting. I think I also want to touch on the cups, the compostable cups that you talked about. One of our employees, or several of our employees, highlighted the amount of plastic bottles, or the number of plastic bottles we were using in meetings, in our cafeteria, as well as these to-go boxes that people use to take food home or take food to their desk rather than eating on site. And we were using plastic for both of those. So our teams worked on getting rid of both of those activities. We have non-plastic, basically, utensils that we are using. But I like that idea of metallic cups. That will be something that sounds interesting. So I'll keep in touch with you on how that goes, and hopefully we implement that on our side as well. So now let's move on to the actions that you're taking related to this. Do you differentiate between virgin plastic versus recycled plastic? I'm not talking about recyclable plastic, but do you guys have any thoughts around, I want to use as much recycled plastic as possible?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Ashu. I guess where we are as a Formula One team, we have high development. We touched on earlier, through the year, if we structure part numbers required to build a car, we may see more than 20,000 released parts, with small batch quantities. So we're in a very, very fast turnaround, highly bespoke, development organization. And I think from my perspective, what we see here is a real challenge, because while we still have to consider our contribution to the track, we should also consider, our contribution to the planet. You mentioned we're all stewards of the environment. Yeah. Now, where we are operating within Formula One, we use a lot of SLA. So they are basically 3D printed plastics. Typically, will be virgin plastics or single-use plastics. We do not differentiate between the two. However, what we do recognize is that when we produce the components, there is also a lot of waste within the manufacturing process, of which some is 90% plus wasted resin material. Okay. Now, again, we, as a Formula One team, we're driven by the innovation of how we improve this process. How do we make it more efficient, and how do we take more product from the investment that we've made? Now, while we do that, we have done a hell of a lot of work in understanding how we can turn the utilization of that raw material into more finished product, in effect becoming more sustainable. And at that point, what we realized is that where we have low yield currently, 9 or 10%, similar to some of the plastic usage we were talking about earlier on, we actually are able now to recycle or reuse the resin, through a process that we've set up with the supply chain. So in effect, where we lose the material and we don't take the yield of the raw material, the resin will be returned and recycled, and we'll reproduce parts from the same batch. So from our perspective, that's a real big step forward within our additive manufacturing world, where we can now start to improve our recycling of the raw material to improve our reduction strategies, or our process within reducing waste, but also allows us to produce more product from that same raw material. So it helps us with our increased throughput.
Yeah, that's again very interesting. I think there's a slight, what I call the difference in the business model. Your company is its own customer, right? So for us, it is, we ship these products to customers, and then there is very little opportunity for Juniper itself to be able to reuse that plastic or recycle it or get it back. And in that sense, the stakeholder involvement becomes a pretty big deal. So if our customers request, for example, us to become more sustainable, there is a very big contribution from them to be able to do some of those things that you talked about on site when they are, taking the packaging off of the product. And I think that's probably the reason why we are emphasizing primarily on moving a lot of the plastic use to recycled plastic as much as possible. Because of that reason, because we don't know what happens to that plastic once it gets to our customers' locations. It might get discarded, it might get recycled or not. So we want to minimize the footprint from our point of view, and that requires us to minimize the use of virgin plastic in our packaging. That brings me to a very interesting point here around challenges. What challenges do you see on this journey, as well as some of the activities that you are taking up to reduce waste, to reduce plastic waste, especially within the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of things within the organization. You touched on, Ashu, and it's a very good point that we are our own supplier and customer. So internally, we are in complete control of what we do. Now, from our perspective, that is a great opportunity to make a real difference within the organization. But I think that the core driver behind it is an understanding of everybody that is within the organization and the surrounding areas within the supply chain, to really understand, why are we doing this? Yeah, why are we trying to reduce waste, particularly plastic waste? Why are we trying to become more sustainable? And as part of our journey along that road, what we've decided is that we have implemented a management system, if you will, that is linked to a British standard. It's an ISO standard. It's 14001, and in effect, what that drives us to do, and it is a mandate of the standard, is to make sure that we measure, so at least we have a data set by which we can refer, which is, I touched on earlier on, the total waste produced in 2023. This really starts to keep us honest and aware of what it is that we are producing and creating. I think that for me is the first challenge. Yeah, and once you understand the scale, then you can start to transact and action some of the response and countermeasure strategies that we need to do to continue to push sustainability. Beyond beyond that management system, we also make sure that if we see variance to our targets, that we're very open with the team. Yeah, we've got to make sure that people are completely empowered and informed with where we are performing against our targets. So I gave you the example of additive manufacturing and trying to improve the use of the raw material. We also are in a position where we are trying to take what cannot be reused. So where we have product that's being raw material that's being utilized in the building that cannot be reused, what else can we do with it? Yeah, so we have seek to find globally some opportunities where we can use the raw material as a backfill or filling system for roadways, for example. So we're currently going through some analysis to see whether we could reuse the raw material rather than recycle in our own world. It's not as beneficial, but at least it's a step forward for us in that regard. Now, the challenge comes, and I think some of the questions may push us in this direction, where we continue to develop race after race. Obviously, we create more and more waste, and we are using more and more raw material. So the simple question is, well, for the more that you produce, Ben, the more waste that's created, what do you do with more waste? And that's where the teams, month on month, we see the waste increasing. We then have to start to offset with our reuse or recycle strategies. And I think, Ashu, they're the two challenges. Yeah, it's having our management system, making sure that we are honest, open, and aware of our contribution. And then beyond that, where we implement strategies to try and manage the variances in our targets, that's just keeping the team engaged and empowered to make sure that we can achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again, that's a basic tenet of improvement, right? If you don't measure, you cannot improve, right? The first thing you need is the baselining or the measurement of what you currently have, and I think you're absolutely right. That's a challenge to do, especially for something as diverse as use of plastic. It's everywhere in your offices, in your cafeteria, in your operations, in your packaging, in your product. So getting all of that together to get like an organizational level of plastic consumption is pretty hard. And I think I want to probably speak a little bit around the challenges that Juniper has from a scalability point of view. I think that's the basic difference between the two organizations, right? It's a high volume manufacturing versus bespoke but very precise manufacturing that AMF1 has. For us, some of the challenges are pretty obvious. As I mentioned in the beginning, only about 9% of the total plastic that gets produced every year is recycled. And that leads to issues with supply. We just don't have enough supply of recycled plastic. And if there is supply, it comes at a slight premium to using virgin plastic. And plastics are, incredible from that point of view. It's one of those commodities, I would say, where a recycled part is more expensive than a new part. It's cheaper to create new plastic than it is to create recycled plastic. It's just in that fact is amazing to us. So what that leads to is some cost premium on the most parts that we want to move to recycled plastic from virgin plastic, as well as the risk to supply, because then a lot of our packaging materials are locally sourced. So wherever our manufacturing factories are, and there are several, in order to reduce risk to supply chain, we have to go to local suppliers and get the recycled plastic packaging parts, and that's challenging. That has proven hard to do. And then one very interesting challenge that we also see in our overall sustainability, worldview, our carbon emissions are as important of a metric to us as reduction in plastic. And what ends up happening is when you try to go to non-plastic packaging or even recycled plastic packaging, generally the size and the weight of the component is bigger. So it's a bigger volume, it's a bigger weight to get you the same cushioning, that you need to protect your product. And at the end of the day, packaging is functioning as protection while your product is in shipment. So by using heavier, bigger pieces that are non-plastic or recycled plastic, you increase your logistics emissions. So then it becomes a game of balancing increase in logistics emissions with the desire of reducing virgin plastic use in your packaging. And we have developed certain models that we rely on to see how much is the increase in emissions and how much is the reduction in plastic and so on, and we make decisions that way. But I would come back to a point I made initially. Some of that is dependent on what our customers want. So for example, if our customers agree to using ocean shipment for their products, which of course has an increased lead time, it's much easier for us to use non-plastic packaging or recycled plastic packaging versus virgin plastic. So there is significant amount of stakeholder involvement, customer involvement, and engagement that's required for us to make that transition to non-plastic or recycled plastic packaging if you want to get there, 100%. So I found that, through this activity, I found that to be the case, and I was again very surprised the balance between the emissions versus plastic reduction. It's not one and all, so you have to keep, just like everything else, I guess, you have to make a balance between the two. So let me just touch on something related to emissions as well. I know Formula One has very stiff targets to become net zero. I believe it's net zero by 2030, and I'm sure they are pushing on individual teams to get there as well. Do you guys have any specific activities or plans that you are doing for reducing carbon emissions within your organization as well?
Yeah, obviously, actually, we touched on earlier on. We have a global sport, 24 races a year, all across the globe. So naturally, that becomes challenging with regards to carbon emissions because we constantly move a product around the globe from race to race. Now, when we do that, our key driver is the more product that we can put into a sea freight transportation route rather than air freight, the lower the carbon contribution. So that's one of our primary drivers at this moment in time is how can we minimize air freight and maximize sea freight as a big step forward. But in addition to that, what we also should consider is as a group of F1 teams, as a group of 10 teams, we now come together on a routine basis with the FIA to discuss and understand where we are as a team on our journey to net zero 2030. And within that environment, there is more and more common ground and understanding being developed. So I think, strategically as teams, although we're not quite there yet, the desire and focus is now heading towards 2030 net zero. And as the teams come together, obviously the more input and the more alignment that we have, the more effective our journey is in that direction. So they're the two priorities at this moment in time. And beyond that, really, it's everything that we do as part of our carbon roadmap. So we can probably discuss that in far more detail in the future, I'm sure.
And I'm sure for you, I mean, it is for us the engagement from all of our employee base, all of our leaders in the organization. We all have to go there as one, right? Unless you have enthusiasm, unless you have that drive from your own organizations, these things are really hard to achieve. So what do you guys do to encourage excitement within AMF1 towards sustainability, towards waste reduction, towards emissions reductions, and so on?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ashu. And as we touched on earlier on, it's a big challenge. The education piece is a huge part of what we owe to ourselves as stewards of the environment, but also to our employees and our supply chain. So, from our perspective, we try to bring employees together in things like Sustainability Day. So we created a day down the centre of the factory or the centre of the campus. We set up maybe 15 or 20 stalls of all different types of small businesses that have workshops on beeswax and how we can reuse it, on how we manage waste through recycling, how we can, as human beings, make a better contribution to the environment and to our waste. By changing simple things day in, day out. The obvious one that came out of that forum or that event was the coffee cups that we touched on earlier on. And by bringing people in to an environment that is still in the workplace, but is completely separate and completely isolated away from the general day-to-day work, it drives some energy within the organization, because it now becomes real. Yeah, we can now see a large proportion of the staff that we have within the team engaging with that exciting environment on the ground floor of the campus. So that was a huge step forward for us. What we also do is we have a routine exec-sponsored sustainability steering committee that ensures that where we have opportunities and where we have improvements and the supply chain and the internal employees come up with ideas of how we can improve, there is a place for it to go as a suggestion, so that we can then put adequate resource and empowerment behind it. So between that type of highly engaging first-hand experience with specialists within the sustainability arena, as well as having a mechanistic cadence within the organization, that's how we've continued to drive the engagement and the excitement within the building.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And I think I have to say, fairly similar to the structure that we are adopting, right? I think much of this flows from top down. So you have to have your leaders, driving the importance of this into the rest of the organization. And for that purpose, we have incentives already. We use something called an OKR process. We have an OKR at the executive level, where sustainability is front and center, and that kind of flows through to the rest of the organization. We have also created some employee experience pillars, and one of which is sustainability. And again, the objective is exactly the same: to get ideas from the general employees, as well as bit more crowdsourcing, bit more communication on things that we are doing well already. It's the motivation, if we are already doing well, is far better than if people don't know about it. So that's kind of the other thing that we do to create excitement within our employees. At this point, Ben, I would want to transition into maybe, let's take an audience question or two, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, let's do that.
Okay, so let me read the first question that we received from our audience. Can you provide more details on the progress Juniper has made in reducing plastics? So as I was mentioning in the beginning, we baselined our plastic use just in our packaging for 2022, and it was more than 1 million pounds of plastic that we were using. Approximately, I would say, about 25% of that was virgin plastic. So, somewhere around 250,000 pounds of virgin plastic. So from 2022 to 2023, we reduced our virgin plastic use by 45% in just 1 year. Again, focusing on the high volume parts that were contributing the most virgin plastic and trying to move those to recycled plastic material as much as possible, or to non-plastic materials. So we are trying to move a lot of our packaging to single type compostable, which is what our customers want as well. And our customers have been really helpful in making us get there. So we reduced our virgin plastic by 45% and our overall plastic use by 12% just in 1 year from 2022 to 2023. Our targets are really ambitious. I don't know if we are going to meet or beat all of those targets, but we are going to do our best. So we want to reduce the overall plastic by 40% by next year, by 2025. And again, it's a very challenging goal. Within that, we want to reduce the virgin plastic part of it to less than 15% of the overall plastic. And remember, it was about 25% in 2022. So very ambitious goals Juniper has. I think we have made very good progress over 2022 to 23. But every leg lower becomes more challenging. But we are on our way. Ben, I'll take one more questions. Apart from actions Juniper and AMF1 is already taking, what are some effective ways organizations can contribute to reducing plastic waste in their operations and supply chain? Ben, I'll come to you on this. Any thoughts you want to provide on that one?
Yeah, I think we touched on it a couple of times, Ashu, regarding the supply chain. So where we recognize high impact suppliers, it's really for us to develop the relationship with the suppliers and continue to mature through our target setting that they are included within this. We touched ISO 14001 earlier on, where we are managing our data sets, managing our targets, and empowering our internal employees and staff to achieve them. When we go external within the supply chain, we work in a very similar way. So where we continue to raise the awareness of the supply chain, we also expect the same commitment and drive forwards. So that's part of my responsibility to encourage that maturity within the supply chain. Beyond that, when we think about internal staff, we've spoken about engagement, excitement. I think you mentioned about continuing the communication. I think that's keeping it front and center is really key within the organization, whether it's in live displays, whether it's in leaflets that go within the building, whether it's online, wherever we can publish this information, we should and we do. And beyond that, then really we at a very simple level, I guess we can take some small examples where internally we use some packaging at times within the factory to protect parts. Because we don't want parts to decay during the manufacturing process. Now, where possible, we've looked to reduce that plastic waste either by reuse or actually replacing it with a better alternative. So we now use a very simple cardboard or paper equivalent to the plastic use that we've seen previously. So I think they are the three stages really of an external supply chain, the internal manufacturing operation, but also making sure that the staff are continually communicating and understanding of where we're at within our target setting, and making sure that the supply chain follows in our footsteps.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think pretty much echo the points that you made. The only thing I would say is sometimes, as far as your own organization, your own employees are concerned, small things make a big difference, right? And I gave the example of eliminating plastic bottles and to-go containers in the cafeteria. Even though the absolute plastic reduction from that activity is probably not that much, we probably reduce a lot more by just converting one packaging part to non-plastic. But the optics of doing that, the motivation it brings to our employee base, as well as the enthusiasm it brings, is invaluable. So you have to look at small impact but big optics type of activities as well. Not only what is a high volume activity from our point of view. as well. And I heard you say beeswax somewhere in there. Can you speak to what that is? That's very interesting to me.
Yes. So what we had a specialist company come and join us, where they were using beeswax to wrap and basically secure or protect product. Yeah. So that's, I guess it's almost like a natural reuse solution. So they joined us on our sustainability day and just explained to the staff, to the employees, and the attendees to the event how we could utilize beeswax, in our lives, really. And it's great because when you see the ideas and promote this, this engagement, the impact that it has on the employees or the people engaging with it, as you just touched on, it makes a huge difference. Within the culture of the organisation and within the thinking of the people that are engaged with it, albeit that the contribution to to our global goal or our stewardship of the environment, as you suggest, is perhaps negligible. Yeah, and those are really interesting steps. I think we linked to that. We also, we must avoid, based on what the UK requirements are, that disposable plastic cutlery just doesn't exist as a thing for us anymore. We now have various different types. What we try to do is allow people enough product available to them in the canteen or the rest areas, so that we continually rewash, metallic equivalents. So a little bit like the metallic coffee cup that each employee will have. We also do the same with the cutlery within the canteen. So they are the small gains but huge optics that you touch on just now.
Yeah, wonderful. So Ben, we are coming on time. I really want to thank you for joining me in this chat today and all the valuable insights that you provided, not only to me but to our audience as well. Thank you very much, Ben.
No problem. Ashley, it was a pleasure.